Hello everybody, Shrouded Hand here. I'm not going to mess around with some long-winded introduction for this video. Do you want to hear a story that'll sicken you to your core? Well then, let's get right into it. On January the 6th, 2007, Channon Christian and her boyfriend Chris Newsom were planning to go for a meal together in their home city of Knoxville, Tennessee. Channon Christian was a 21-year-old student attending the University of Tennessee. She also worked 2 jobs. Chris Newsom worked as a trim carpenter at a construction company. The two of them had been dating for around 3 months. That afternoon, Channon Christian had gone to her friend's place at Washington Ridge Apartments to get ready for the night ahead. The plan was for Chris Newsom to pick her up there. They would go for a meal together, then they would meet up with friends for a party later that night. Sometime after 9 PM, Newsom arrived at the Washington Ridge Apartments. He parked his truck and went with Channon to her car at the apartment's parking lot. Before entering the vehicle, they stopped and embraced. Little did they know that they were being observed by 4 men. Lamarcus Davidson, a local drug dealer and the apparent ringleader of this group, had enlisted his brother Letalvis Cobbins and his 2 friends, George Thomas and Eric Boyd, to take part in what they thought would be a regular carjacking. There doesn't seem to be any reason why they picked Channon and Chris that night. They didn't know the couple. They probably just saw them momentarily distracted standing by their car and decided that they would be easy prey. The 4 men set upon the couple, pointing a gun at them and forcing them into the back seat of Channon Christian's Toyota 4Runner. Christian and Newsom's hands were bound behind their backs, and then they were driven back to Davidson's rental house at 2316 Chipman Street. Here the perpetrators meet up with Vanessa Coleman, who was waiting at the house. Why a simple carjacking turned into a kidnap is unknown. It could be they just wanted to extract money from the couple, but once they got them back to the house, things escalated rapidly. Apparently the perpetrators were high on PCP, which might explain, although not excuse, their decision making that night. Inside the Chipman Street house, Channon and Chris were separated and tied up. Then the abuse started. The timeline is a bit unclear, but it looks like they started on Chris Newsom first. He was raped by at least one of the men and anally violated with foreign objects, most likely a broken chair leg, causing severe bruising and lacerations. This abuse went on for a few hours. In the early hours of Sunday morning, he was taken outside and forced to walk to a secluded area near some railroad tracks. It was the middle of winter. He was barefoot, wearing only a t-shirt and underwear. His hands were bound behind his back and his mouth was gagged with his own sock. They secured a dog leash around his neck to stop him from running away. When they reached the railroad, Chris Newsom was made to kneel down and a belt was secured around his ankles. A sweater was pulled over his head and he was shot in the back of the neck. The bullet entered between the neck and the shoulder and failed to kill him. At this point, he fell forward onto his face and they shot him again. The bullet entered his lower back and travelled upwards into his torso, severely damaging his spinal cord, but it still failed to kill him. Eventually, they placed the gun against the side of his head and fired a bullet into his skull just above his right ear, killing him instantly. After killing him, they wrapped his body in a blanket, poured gasoline over it and set him on fire. In some ways, his ordeal was mercifully short. The gunshots occurred at around 1:45 AM, around 4 hours or so after the kidnapping. Channon Christian had a much longer nightmare ahead of her. At around 12:30 AM on the Sunday morning, she was forced to call her father and tell him that she would be home late. Over the following hours, she was tortured to near death. She was choked, stamped on, and raped repeatedly. Her mouth, anus, and genitals were severely bruised and lacerated from where she'd been brutally penetrated with foreign objects. The severity of these violations had caused a lot of blood to pool in her genital area, which later formed a large clot. In her mouth, the frenulum connecting the lip and the gum had been torn away as her mouth was forced open. Both sides of her head had extensive hemorrhaging from where they had stamped on her. The rest of her body was covered in bruises, scratches and carpet burns. When he grew tired of torturing Channon, then came what might be the very worst part of her ordeal. First, they decided that they needed to get rid of any DNA evidence that might link her to them. They got a bleach cleaning solution and poured it down her throat. Then they poured it over her genitals and tried to scrub the entire area clean. With her body bleached and scrubbed, they tied her up in a fetal position. Her legs were pulled up and bound tightly with her thighs against her chest. Her head and neck were pushed forward so that her left cheek pressed against her bent knees. They then got some curtain material and tied it between her neck and ankles, holding her tightly in this agonizing position. They placed a small white garbage bag over her head and secured it around her neck. They then wrapped her entire body in a garbage bag, then another, then another. In total, they had 5 black garbage bags wrapped around her body. They then lifted her up and placed her, hog-tied and plastic wrapped, into a large trash can. They bundled a load of bedding sheets on top of her and then they fixed the lid tightly in place. The most horrible thing about this is she was still alive when they put her inside the bin. She died slowly from a combination of positional asphyxiation and confined space asphyxiation. Simply put, from the position she was tied in and the small space she was placed in, she was unable to get enough air into her lungs. Forensic experts estimated that it would have taken between 10 and 30 minutes for her to die. It was an unbelievably traumatic way to go. When they found her body, her eyes were wide open. From the moment of her kidnapping up until her death, it's not known exactly how long the ordeal lasted. It is thought that she died sometime on the Sunday evening or the Monday morning, meaning that she was probably tortured for around 24 hours before being placed into the bin. Chris Newsom's charred body was discovered by a railroad worker around 11 hours after he died. Semen was found in Newsom's rectum, which might have led to his killers, but the heat from the fire had destroyed any DNA evidence. Shannon Christian's car was found on the Monday. Fingerprint evidence found inside the car led police to Lamarcus Davidson's rental house. The next day, Tuesday the 9th of January, officers obtained a warrant to search the property. When they entered, they found the house completely empty, but they spotted a 32-gallon plastic garbage can sitting in the corner of the kitchen. At first they thought that somebody might be hiding inside, so they drew their weapons and slowly opened the lid, but when they opened it, they found a cold, lifeless arm sticking up out of a plastic bag, partially covered in the bedding material. They then knew that they'd found Shannon's body. Semen was found inside Shannon's mouth, rectum and vagina, and it was DNA matched to Lamarcus Davison and Letalvis Cobbins. There was a brief manhunt for Davidson. He was hiding out in an abandoned house. Eventually they arrested Eric Boyd and he led them to where Davidson was hiding. During questioning, Lamarcus Davidson, being the honourable gentleman that he is, tried to pass the blame onto Judge Thomas and Letalvis Cobbins. Soon afterwards, Thomas, Cobbins and Vanessa Coleman were arrested too. Ultimately, Lamarcus Davidson was given the death sentence. Last I heard about it, his appeal in 2019 was denied, so he's still on death row. Letalvis Cobbins was given a life sentence without parole. George Thomas was given a 127 years sentence, but in 2018 he agreed to testify against Eric Boyd in return for having his sentence reduced to 50 years. There wasn't enough evidence to charge Eric Boyd with murder in the first trials, so he was sentenced to a maximum of 18 years imprisonment. After Judge Thomas testified against him in 2018, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. There was also insufficient evidence against Vanessa Coleman, although she was present in the house whilst everything was happening, and at times she was left alone in the house with Channon Christian, so she could have helped her to escape. They still couldn't prove that she'd taken part in the abuse or the killings. She was still given a 53-year sentence, but that was later appealed and reduced to 35 years. She has been eligible for parole twice since then, but she was denied both times. And that's pretty much where things are now at the time of writing. All 5 perpetrators are still behind bars and all appeals have been denied. I keep thinking back to Channon Christian's death, what her final moments must have been like. It reminds me of an old Chinese torture I've heard of called tying in a ball. The arms are tied behind the back, the legs are tied in a lotus position, and the neck is pulled tight against the knees. These pictures are of somebody recreating the punishment. It's not a picture of somebody actually being tortured, but it gives you an idea of what it's like. From the reports I've read on people who have experienced this torture, every second in this position is agonisingly uncomfortable. Now imagine being tied up this way and wrapped up in plastic and stuffed into a trash can, like Channon Christian, who was packed in so tight that they found indents in her forehead where it was pressed against the inside of the can. When you watch the courtroom footage, you can see how tightly the lid goes on.
The garbage bag and the garbage can. And there's the belt and the white glove. And there's a garbage can. And there's her arm. That's how it was when we found it.
And on that note, I will end the video here. Thank you for watching. I hope you found it informative, even if it was depressing. Big thanks to everyone who is supporting the channel. I appreciate everyone who signed up, and it really helps me make content like this. Here's some more videos you might find interesting. Otherwise, look out for me. I'll be in your recommendations in the near future. Until next time, goodbye.